Hi all, and welcome to the China EVs and More Clubhouse Room, where my co-host Lei Xing and I will go over some of the week's most important news coming out of the China EV, AV, and mobility sectors that will have effects on the global auto markets. We'll also open the room up for the final 15 to 20 minutes for anyone who's keen to ask us any questions, so please raise your hand early if there's something you want to say. One rule: we appreciate vigorous debate, but let's all be considerate and respectful to each other. Briefly, what Lei and I discuss over the next hour or so is based on our opinions and should not be taken as investment advice. Even if it sounds like investment advice, it isn't. We encourage those who enjoy this room to please follow us on Clubhouse, promote this room to your friends, and of course tune in again next week. My name is Tu Li, and I am the founder and managing director at Sino Auto Insights, a Beijing-based consultancy that helps organizations bring innovative and tech-focused products and services to the transportation and mobility markets. I write a free weekly newsletter that we pull many of our discussion topics from, although this week we're just talking about the Shanghai Auto Show. So you can sign up for it at sinoautoinsights.com, which I encourage you all to do. Lei, can you please introduce yourself?
Good morning from my side. I am the former chief editor of China Auto Review, and I've spent most of the last 20 years on the ground covering the Chinese auto industry through our magazines and conferences. I'm now here in the US as an independent analyst consultant on the Chinese auto industry. So before we pick each other's brains on the Shanghai Auto Show, just a couple of housekeeping issues. Notice our clubroom title with the recap 1. So we're coming right back tomorrow night, US time, US Eastern time at 9 p.m. and China Friday morning at 9 a.m. Because there's so much to cover, we felt, this is a special week and we're going to do 2 episodes rather than just 1. And the other housekeeping issue is that we know the Tesla protest incident that made big news at the Shanghai Auto Show. We're not going to talk about it. I think it's better to focus on, there's much other interesting things that have happened at the show. So if people that have questions on that incident, we're happy to respond and discuss, but we're not going to talk about it. Today, we are going to focus on the foreign brands, and tomorrow night, we come back with more on the Chinese and tech brands. So that's the housekeeping issues. 2, so you were at the show for pretty much 2 days. Your feet are still sore, I guess. What were your impressions? What were your top models? So just give the audience some of your thoughts.
Yeah, so first, let me kind of set the table a little bit. I flew into Shanghai on Sunday night and was a bit anxious because I was told I'd registered and everything was fine, but I didn't get any tickets or any lanyards. So I was also told that getting in, re-entry, and exit for the 2 or 3 days that I was planning on being there was going to be through facial recognition, something that I hadn't had to deal with or experience before. And so wake up Monday morning, my backpack on, and luckily I was staying downtown, but the Line 2 station was directly across the street, and I just took a straight shot, about 40 minutes to get from downtown Xintiandi area to Hongqiao, where the convention center is. And all went off without a hitch, went upstairs and was a bit confused, scanned a QR code, and it sent me a password that showed that once I entered the password, the ticket showed up, and so everything was fine. Had to show my health code, so I got passed. And then there's a table or a kiosk with some people to the right of the entrance where they took my picture or they scanned my face. I went over to the entry gate. They placed my passport similar to the airport, looked at the camera, the gate opens. Pretty painless. So I walk in there, and it's still pretty early. I think it's about 8:15. And so most of the media events don't start until 9 or 9:30. So I'm trying to situate myself. I take a look at the map and realize that this place is huge.
How did you get in for not being in media?
Oh,
I'm going to take your brain on that. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, so there's this website called Taobao. And so you can buy an exhibitor pass because you can actually buy a media pass, but you need media credentials in order to buy a media pass. And so I could have gotten a media pass on behalf of someone else, but I decided to just be an exhibitor, and hence my concern about whether or not the guy was legit. So, but fingers crossed, I walked through, it worked. And so I was an exhibitor. But so I get into the Shanghai Auto Show, and I just, first 5 seconds, I look around, kind of soak it in. It's not that crowded because most of the time when I go to auto shows, I've been going to auto shows since I was 6 or 7 years old as a little kid in Detroit. Hadn't missed the Detroit Auto Show in 15, 16, 17 years, and then missed a ton of them. And now moving to China, I've been to probably 6 or 7 of these auto shows, back and forth between Beijing. I've probably been to twice as many auto shows in Beijing as I have in Shanghai. And I'm just going to say this now, and we talked about it earlier, and my wife's not going to like this probably, but Shanghai is just, it's just a better city. It's more convenient, and the auto show reflects that. The convention center in Beijing everything's like separated, and it's just not as conducive as the Shanghai Convention Center. It's a huge place, but how it's laid out makes a ton of sense. So getting to the actual media events, I got to go see Neos. I went and saw Fords. I saw Jeep, who is importing the hybrid, and a few others. But general observation for me, it was good to be back at the show. Beijing last year was pretty subdued, and so there was a lot more electricity in the air for this show, and I was a bit overwhelmed. You and I were prepping, kind of looking at the map and all the different brands. You had written a nice post in Medium about how to prepare for the auto show, and that helped me quite a bit, frankly. So I was excited about seeing everybody, but there's obviously a handful, 10 brands that I wanted to see in particular. Further observations, I was excited, and although I was running around on day one, I was a bit anxious because I didn't want to miss anything. That was kind of the feeling I had, right? And the convention center, again, is massive, but it's well laid out. And so Monday was dedicated to really just trying to seek out these product launches, and I saw quite a bit. And I'll go a bit further a little bit later. But day two, on Tuesday, yesterday, I just went there early and geeked out. I walked around, I got to touch, got to feel cars. We also spent some time, you and I, on WeChat, just kind of being able to geek out and talk about cars and stuff like that. So that was pretty cool. And one of the pleasant surprises yesterday was that deputy minister from the MIIT, who had his ring kissed by the head of Zeekr, the head of Xpeng, the head of NIO. So that was pretty cool. And what I think, having spent 2 days there now, is that the auto show and the brands there's a maturity that 4 or 5 years ago, I think we would have seen some really weird designs, some really bad build quality on these cars.
There are still a lot of weird designs to me.
Yeah. Really?
Yeah.
Oh, no, there are some weird designs, but to me, they're more conventionally weird as opposed to like weird. I don't know how to define that. And then, I guess here's my definition. There's no like crazy molding, and there's no like weird color schemes on some of these cars and stuff like that you might have seen in the past. Well, no crazy molding with the exception of Tank, which is Great Wall's new brand. Who's like this SUV brand that's supposed to be this tough Hummer type brand. And with the exception of the Land Rover Defender, that still has some plastically crazy, cheap looking molding.
So back to my question, if you were to list maybe your top 5 models, any brand, what would you say? I'll tell you mine later.
So
you have a
I
list?
think, yeah, I don't have five, but let's just say I really thought the Lincoln Zephyr Reflection was a beautiful car. You know, the first time I saw it, it reminds you of some cars for sure. There's definitely some similarities with other cars, but you know, it's the best looking Lincoln I've seen in quite some time. Getting to see the ET7 from NIO again, I think that's going to sell really well. It's a huge car too. It's got to be at least the size of a Model S. So that could be one of the flagships for NIO, and I think it's going to do really well. And then, you know, I like the Zeekr 001. Again, it favors some design details of other cars, but it would have been nice to be able to get into it. I wasn't able to get into the Lincoln either, or the ET7, so maybe my impressions would change if I got inside and had to look at the feel of the user experience. But are you going to tell us yours right now, or are you going to wait it out a little bit?
Yeah, I'll tell you mine first, and I agree with you. I think the Ford Evos and the Lincoln Zephyr Reflection were pleasant surprises because there were not much revealed before the event. The other one is the Ceres SF5 Huawei Select. Nobody knew that was coming. And the ones that really were controversial, I think, were the Great Wall Tank series, the new tank brand, and the Aura Lightning and Punk Cats. I think those were quite outrageous to me. The other two are, to me, were the Audi A6 e-tron. That will be the first PPE model to be produced by the FAW Volkswagen joint venture. And then the Japanese Honda's SUV concept and Toyota's BZ4X. Those are my list of what I thought was significant or controversial brands. And I think this is a good segue to, we're focused on foreign brands, and let's go into the US brands, Ford and GM. What do you think? I mean, I think Ford, they hit it out of the park with the Ford Evos, considering this is mostly designed in China, for China.
Yeah, I think so. They're planning on making the Ford Evos, I think, a global car. It'll be sold in China initially, and then Europe, and eventually the United States, I believe. It also has some unique design cues that are specific to China. The front grille, I think it moves like dragon scales once you move towards it and are close enough. And so, I had an opportunity to speak with the engineering manager in charge of the Evos, and he was very effusive in his praise of how they were able to design a lot of it or most of it in China, and how proud he was of that, because it didn't seem like they were given, they're kind of taking some autonomy from Dearborn, because normally in the past those decisions or those designs would come from Dearborn, and they would just be derivatives of those Dearborn designs for the China markets. And so I think Ford had to hit these out of the ballpark, and they did. Because, this, as of 6 or 7 years ago, Ford was doing okay. They came late to China, so that didn't help. And, there's a reputation or a rumor that Chang'an is not the easiest joint venture partner to deal with. And so they were over 1 million units in sales 6, 7, 8 years ago, 1.2, 1.4, something like that. And as of last year, I think they were close to 500,000 units. Now, it's a management issue because they didn't have a general manager for the China region, or the China country of China, for about 3 or 4 years. So Chen Enning came in recently, and I think he's kind of righted the ship. Because my ex-coworkers seem to think that he's the right person. They like his leadership. They were importing a lot of cars, and they're starting to make Lincolns in China, and they're starting to make more Fords in China. So to your point, these two cars have to do extremely well. With the addition of the Mach-E, we forgot about the Mach-E too, right? So that was there, and I think that's going to do really well. And I believe all 3 of those cars are going to be built in Chongqing with the Chang'an Ford joint venture. So do you think the Mustang is going to do pretty well here?
I actually just 2 days ago test drove a Mustang Mach-E at a local dealership here, and I loved it. And I was saying, I see no reason why the locally produced Mach-E won't do well. Going back to the auto show, I remember for Ford 2 years ago when they launched this China 2.0 strategy, they were at a low, like a very low. Their annual sales were tanking, and they just announced the new Edge SUV for the Chinese market. And I think in recent months and days, they're hitting all the right notes, with announcing the Mach-E at the very early stage, this surprising EVOS and the Lincoln. And I think they're figuring out things well now. And also there's a huge change at the top. If you look at Jim Farley, if you follow him on LinkedIn or Twitter, he's been very vocal about what's going on in China and congratulating the local team, achieving first quarter sales. And he's tweeting about, the auto show in Shanghai. You didn't see this happening at all back in the Hackett days or Field days or Mulally days. So everything is being localized, being what they call best of Ford, best of China commitment. So I think they're on a way back up again.
Well, their bread is being buttered primarily by the F-150. But Jim Farley knows if they're to be and remain a global brand, then it needs to be buttered by other products. And so I'm sure he's hopeful that all three of these cars are going to take share. These cars are just in really, really competitive markets. So I think they're going to do fine. I don't know, if they're going to be sales leaders, but the crossover and the luxury, that's going to be brutal competition. Right?
Yeah, I think Ford has realized that, they have this one Ford thinking, but actually the one Ford thinking does not work in China. You have to have two Fords. You have to have one Ford for the US and one Ford for specifically for China. And they now realize this. And it's just a different approach that you have to adapt. And I think it's working. And we'll see how these Mach-E and the upcoming EVOs will do. And the Lincoln's doing well.
Yeah, so Lincoln is about 100,000 in sales, and ABB is at around 800,000 units per year. So they're doing double-digit growth in China, but on a very, very small base. And in order to catch up to ABB, they need to catch up to Cadillac, which is selling around 250,000 units. Now, the good thing is that, this Lincoln Zephyr Reflection at least should attract that younger consumer, that digital native that's between, 30 and 40 years old, that is going to lean into that coast-to-coast instrument panel. That actually looked really nice. I don't know how it's going to function yet. Obviously I wasn't able to touch and play with it, but it looked pretty natural. And that's one of the other things that I wanted to emphasize about my observations is kind of the technology, right? Across the board with every booth that I went into, it could have been a 150,000 RMB car, it could have been a million RMB car. There was just a ton of technology that was stuffed into it, and a lot of it is, quite frankly, the normal consumer is just not going to really understand a lot of what's going on. But what they will know, and which remains to be seen from anyone, is how the software from these vehicles can integrate into their current digital life and how it can enhance their current digital life, right? So the proof is in the pudding. What I think, and this could be controversial, I'd love your take on this or opinion. 15 years, I don't know if exterior design is really going to be that much of a difference maker. I think if you squint, all these vehicles, similar market segment, small SUV, medium-sized SUV, large SUV, if you squint, they all kind of look alike. Crossovers, they kind of have the same shape. So main differentiator for sure in the next 15 years, in my opinion, is going to be, the interior, how it integrates, and these ADAS features, right? So what do you think?
Yeah, well, Ford is really into it with Baidu. So they're launching their Sync Plus 2.0, which combines Baidu's AI technology and the digital application ecosystem. And then on the ADAS side, Ford is going to introduce the Blue Cruise, which they recently announced here in the US. They're going to introduce that into the Evos as well in China. And the other part of it for Ford's strategy in China, people don't often talk about it, is they've been big on the CV2X technology. So I remember at least the last 3 or 4 years, every year when the SAE hold the annual conference in China, Ford will be like testing their vehicles with CV2X. And I think they're launching their first models with CV2X technology this year, which is actually a crucial part of ADAS and autonomous driving. And I think they're much more aggressive on this front than some of the others.
And they, to emphasize your point about, China for China, they actually separated their design team from Lu Jiazui and Pudong. And I believe the team now resides in Yangpu, which is in Puxi. So I was told that they've hired a lot of local UX designers, a lot of vehicle designers, so that we should really get a bit of separation between some of these China-only vehicles. So the Lincoln Zephyr currently is only supposed to be sold in China, and it's very close to production. It should be shipping by mid next year. So they're probably going to start pilots towards the end of this year. And, I would imagine by Chinese New Year, they're starting to ramp a little bit and maybe ship in the summer. So I think that Zephyr is going to do fine as well here.
So I guess for Ford, the word I would use to describe their situation in China is promising, whereas 2 years ago, the word probably would have been dire. That's how I would probably sum up Ford. Let's do General Motors. What do you think? Besides their Wuling Hongguang Mini that we often talked so much on the show, I didn't think besides the Cadillac Lyriq and some of the new Buick, new SUVs and sedans, actually General Motors was quite low-key this year, I thought. What do you think?
Yeah, they were definitely low-key. I think they wanted to really emphasize Cadillac's first EV, the Lyriq. So they had that launch here. It was already introduced in the United States in the past, and I thought it was supposed to be manufactured and shipped here in China first before manufacturing and production began in the United States. But I just read that they might actually be manufacturing in the US before China. With that being said, I believe that Cadillac is really going to embrace that competition between ABB. And for those folks who aren't familiar with ABB stands for Audi, BMW, and Benz, who are generally the leaders here, and not the ultra luxury, obviously, but the premium and luxury segment. And so that luxury segment is currently the only segment that's still growing at a decent rate. The American automakers with their luxury brands, Lincoln and Ford, Lincoln and Cadillac are growing along with the market, whereas the ABB have kind of settled in at around 800,000 units a year. But I think there's going to be massive competition over the next 18, 24, 36 months from some of these Chinese brands as well that we'll talk about on Friday. But should we move to some of these German automakers?
Yeah, so General Motors, maybe just might add that Cadillac, among all the luxury or the premium brands, they don't have a EV model. So it'll be interesting. They will bring in the Lyriq, but I wonder how they will choose the first locally produced model. But I guess what's going to happen is that SAIC GM, their first joint venture in China, will be huge on the Ultium, localizing the Ultium platform vehicles. I think they're launching more than 10 models based on that platform by 2025, covering all their 3 brands, Chevrolet, Buick, and Cadillac. Mm-hmm. And Buick, I think, has its own, because Buick China is the largest market for Buick. They're launching their own vehicles, I think 5 EVs by 25. So maybe, General Motors case is very interesting. They actually are the leader among the foreign brands if you count the Wuling EV, mini EV as, right? So I guess they're setting, I guess they're happy with where they are, but it'll be interesting on how they catch up on their, Ultium platform series vehicles.
It should help them, right? Because it's kind of a uniform platform that creates the economy of scales and standardization where it needs to. Now, whether they can execute on that is a different story. So as we move to the Germans, let's talk about the ID.6, right? That was debuted here at the Auto Show as well. And I think one of the cooler things was that Wallenstein, who's the Wallenstein, who's the VW brand CEO for China. I thought it was a nice touch that he did his entire speech in Mandarin. And you had mentioned to me that he's an old China hand, so maybe you can, if you know a little bit about him, you can tell a little bit more about, what he's been doing in China over the last few years or whatever.
Yeah, for Volkswagen, ID.6 is, it's a China exclusive model, 7-seater family style SUV, a bit kind of a different positioned model than the ID.4 that they just started delivering in March in large volumes. It's interesting that Volkswagen is by far not only the leading foreign brand, but the foreign brand when it comes to big targets. Their capacity for EVs is going to be around 1.2 million vehicles by 2024. And this is the breakdown. The SAIC Volkswagen has 300,000 unit capacity. FAW Volkswagen, 300,000 unit. Their Volkswagen Anhui joint venture, which Volkswagen has a majority share, 350,000. And the newest Audi FAW joint venture that was just established earlier this year has another 250,000. So if you add those up, it's about roughly 1.2 million units. And they think they will be able to sell over 1 million units sometime after 2025. So they're by far the most ambitious, aggressive. And their strategy has been to having the same model but different variants coming out from the two different joint ventures, right? The X and the Cross, slightly different. So similar to what they've been doing with the Passat and the Magotan, right? They had the Terramont, which is the Volkswagen Atlas here in the US, in the Shanghai Volkswagen joint venture. And now they just revealed the Telegon, the same big size SUV for the FAW Volkswagen. So they're just, pumping these new models onto the market like there's no tomorrow, right? So
but they have
so
to,
aggressive.
right? They have to, because they have so much capacity here that they have to have new products all the time in order to keep that sales going.
Yeah.
I fear for them that the market has changed. It's different now, right? I think the Chinese buyer is starting to favor domestic brands. And so whereas 20 years ago, 15 years ago, Volkswagen, the brand alone sold you X 100,000 cars a year or whatever, right? But, I think we're in a different time and place. And Volkswagen, they don't have the expertise in software development. They don't have the expertise in battery cell development. So do you think that they're still going to be able to get to these huge numbers?
We'll see how their car software organization, which recently changed into a new name, how that, they have a central development organization, which is
called Artemis.
Well, Artemis is the Audi, the new car, how that will locally transpire in China. And they're starting in the summer to do OTA, every 12 weeks. I think that was announced by these. And when you talk about Volkswagen, right, you really also have to talk about Audi, because Audi was huge, I think, for this year's Auto Shanghai, not only because the number of world premieres, but this new entity, SAIC Audi, which 5 years ago, there was a huge fight with the dealership group because 5 years ago, SAIC Motor signed an MOU with Audi to form a new entity, and that irked the existing FAW Audi dealership. And now Audi has these two entities, right? You see in the auto show that the A7L and the concept Shanghai will be produced at the Shanghai Volkswagen joint venture, and the A6 e-tron and the new Q5L will be at the FAW Volkswagen joint venture. So this is also a way to, again, pump these models in the market, new models. I heard that the SAIC Audi entity will be more responsible for, the A5, A7 individualized, a little bit more on the performance side of the product, whereas the FAW Audi will be for the, the PPE platform new models, as well as existing, cream of the crop models, Q5s, A4s, A6s. You see these different strategies playing out. And then when you say Audi, then you must say the other two competitors, the BBs, right? What's going on with Mercedes, just adding all these EQ models. And BMW really, I thought this year they had a brand night, they unveiled the iX, but the three ABBs, all their first EV models have not performed well, right? The e-tron, the iX3, the EQC. iX3 was forced to reduce prices, right? We talked about that.
Significantly.
Yeah, now they're speeding up their product introductions, maybe to drive their sales in different positioning.
And I'm not a fan of the EQ. We kind of talked about this last week, but I'm not much of a fan of the EQS. So
the EQS has also been very controversial as far as design and the way how it, even in the Chinese industry circles. Globally, it's been very controversial, the design, some of the design points.
Yeah, they went pretty extreme with the design of the EQS, and the EQC, I believe, has not sold very well in Europe, I think, and so they've just priced them so high. Like the iX3, I believe, was the equivalent of $80,000 or $85,000, which is the same size in this. It's essentially an X3 with a battery bolted onto it and the electric motor or the petrol engine ripped out of it. So they're trying to bait and switch customers, and customers are not buying it at all. So it'll be interesting to see, because BMW has a pretty good reputation in China, to see how they can step up and maintain that image. So anything else on the Germans, or should we move to the one Korean company that introduced their luxury brand into the market?
You mean Genesis?
Yeah.
I don't know about Genesis, because talking about the Korean brand, especially now that I'm in the US, I really see the Hyundai and Kia, their perception here in the US is just so much different than in China. Like here it's more, I think they have a very good brand here, but in China somehow they don't have the brand premium feel as much as it does here. And so the Hyundai group, they actually just announced a new strategy in China, something like, take off and more China. And I think they're planning to increase their NEV lineup to more than 21 models by 2030, including their fuel cell vehicles. And they're going to bring in the Ioniq 5 and the EV6, and also dedicated China-only EV models. But this year at the Shanghai Auto Show, I thought Ioniq 5 and the EV6 were previously shown and debuted already. So they, just a matter of really getting
they did launch the G80 EV here for the which was the first time outside of Seoul that they had launched a new product.
Right. In the Hyundai, Kia, along with the Genesis, now they have this similar to the German and the US and other brands. They have a mass market brands in place, and then now they have a premium brand in place. but I don't know. I think the Genesis G80 and the GV80, their starting prices are over 500,000 renminbi. I don't know that will compete.
Yeah, well, I think it'll be lumped in with Lexus and Acura if it'll compete with ABBs directly. So
all the talk has been there what they've done with the drones at their brand launch, and now people are copying them, right? Coming out with QR codes with drones.
That was the drone show was huge, and it gave them
that was early in the month
some coverage for 48 hours, right? And then to your point, there's that gaming company that did a QR code over Shanghai skyline, which was really cool, totally cool. So we covered Germans, the Koreans,
Japanese. We got to talk about the Japanese brand. What do you think?
I actually didn't go over to Lexus. I went over to Lexus and Acura, but there was nothing that stood out to me, right? Because first of all, Lexus has that grille that's just it's off-putting to me because they make beautiful cars, but I don't like the design language of the Lexus and the Acura personally. And they tend to do pretty well here because they have a good reputation for quality and stuff like that. But I'll be quite frank, were there any vehicle launches for Acura or Lexus?
No, not Acura, but Lexus. They showed the new all-new ES and the LFZ concept, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So early in the show, I said two of the surprising products for me was the Honda SUV E near production vehicle, and as well as the Toyota's Beyond Zero, this new kind of the branding of their new EV, starting with the BZ4X, right? It was quite controversial, but I think for the Japanese brand, Toyota, Honda, Nissan, they've never been big on EVs in China, but their hybrids have actually been quite successful. The Corolla hybrid, the Camry hybrid, the Levin hybrid, and
they were banking on the hybrids to really bridge that gap, right? But because it got compressed because of COVID.
So I think the significance of this Honda SUV and the BZ4X is we're now finally seeing the Japanese brands have these dedicated battery electric vehicles and Toyota branded or Honda branded now in the Chinese market. And what's really interesting with the BZ4X is Toyota is developing a series of products off of this new vehicle, including, guess who? BYD. They will develop a local derivative off of this BZ4X with the joint venture with BYD that they announced a couple of years ago.
Isn't the BZ also a joint venture with Subaru?
Yes, that's where I was getting to. Subaru and Daihatsu, they're all working together to develop different derivatives. And this is the first model based on the TNGA platform. And then for Honda, the Honda SUV E's actually also had a lot of local development influence. And that's actually the first Honda branded electric vehicle in China. So far, Honda has only sold EVs using either their partner vehicles, the GAC, one of the GAC vehicles, Aeon, right, for example, or the Simo, the joint venture brand, using the Dongfeng, one of the Dongfeng
which we'll talk about on Friday.
Yeah, and Nissan is entirely a different animal because Nissan is banking on their e-Power technology, which is similar to Li Auto's extended range, right, putting an engine and providing charging power for the battery. So they will put the first vehicle, e-Power localized vehicle, on the Nissan Sylphy, which is their best-selling vehicle for Nissan and almost the best-selling vehicle overall in China, the best-selling sedan. So you see different approaches for the Japanese automakers. But I think this year's Shanghai Auto Show is really, they're finally going into the BEVs and their own branded BEVs. With help from BYD, of course, for Toyota.
Yeah, no, that's why I lean on you, because I have a complete blind spot when it comes to the Japanese. And I follow the Korean Hyundai a little bit, and they've been struggling recently. But,
and then we forgot to talk about So the US Big 3 is now Big 2.5 because, right, Chrysler and PSA, they're now part of the Stellantis. So you mentioned Jeep. That was about the Jeep Wrangler 4xe was the only vehicle that worth a mention. But other than that, right, Stellantis is just, they're still waiting to announce their China strategy. So this was a very low-key event for them.
So I had a beer with higher up at the GAC FCA joint venture, and he said that GAC is a bit hesitant. They're not sure what to think of this new company, number one. And then number two, in order to change the name, the board needs to approve of it. Hence, it's still GAC FCA. And Tavares, who's the new group CEO of Stellantis, he's made this announcement. It's for public consumption that they're going to reduce $5 billion and reduce costs by $5 billion in 1 year or 2 years or something like that. And so I think he's thinking that can happen a bit of it in China. And I think GAC also kind of sees some of that writing on the wall. There's been some leadership changes that I think is also down here in China been a bit controversial. So it will be interesting to see, because cost cutting is not a strategy. You and I know that, right? But Jeep has a great reputation in China, and we also know that the Stellantis merger or acquisition, more appropriately, the golden goose is Dodge and Ram, because they make a disproportionate amount of the profits for Stellantis. So, and Dodge and Ram are primarily a U.S. brand. So how they're going to reevaluate their global strategy with, China hopefully being one of their primary engines for growth is, you've mentioned this a couple times, and I'm as interested as you in figuring out, again, let's repeat it again. Cost cutting is not a strategy. How do we get great products into the market here, right? And I think it's unfortunate, So,
yeah, when you talk about Stellantis, you have to talk about the French brands. So I thought the Citroën C5X is a nice starting point. I really like the design, which, by the way, was done by Pierre Leclerc, who was a former design director for Great Wall when they launched their blue and red badge vehicles back in 2015 in Shanghai. So I really like that design style, the Zeekr 001 shooting brake style. That model will be localized at one of their plants in China. And then for Peugeot, besides they changed their logo, but they really don't have the brand equity or the premium. So I think Stellantis is really, among all of these foreign brands, definitely the worst performing, and it will be interesting to see how they tackle.
They've taken the place of Ford, I think, as the low foreign brand in China. So we are getting on 11 o'clock. Should we open up the floor for questions or comments to see if anybody has anything to say? Ask?
And then just one other mention, we forgot, there's only one other brand origin, which is the Czech brand Škoda, which is also doing very bad in China. Q1 sales, they sold 26,000 units in China in Q1. And Porsche sold 22,000 units. So I'll just leave it at that.
So, but Škoda is doing actually pretty well in the rest of the world, because the group CEO, he recorded a message and he said that they sold over 1 million units globally. Volkswagen Group has just a ton of brands to manage in the China region. So
I think the Jetta brand just beat up on the Škoda brand, because Škoda is like a budget economy, and Jetta just
Yeah, that's the other thing. I don't know if Volkswagen Group is going to be able to survive with all 8 brands in China as they transition over to EVs.
That brings us to the end of this week's show. Lei and I thank you for tuning in.
My name is Tu Lee, and you can find me on Twitter at Sino Auto Insight. That's SinoAutoInsight. You can find Lei on Twitter at LeiXing77. That's LEIXING77. If you wouldn't mind rating and or reviewing us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you grab your podcast from, we'd appreciate that as well. Even better, if you enjoy this show, please tell your friends about it. Please join us again next week as we track down all the latest news on China, EVs, and more.